England, December 1825. The dining room of Thornbury Hall lay shrouded in an unnatural silence, broken only by the sharp crack of crystal-meeting mahogany, as Edmund Talbot, Viscount Thornbury, set down his wine-glass with deliberate force. Lady Rosalind Talbot sat at the opposite end of the long table, her hands folded precisely in her lap, her eyes fixed upon the untouched pheasant on her plate. At 28, she had perfected the art of making herself invisible, of breathing shallowly enough that even the sound of her existence might not disturb the man who had spent 10 years teaching her that she was fundamentally, irreparably wrong. At 18, she had been a hopeful bride, pleased to secure a match society called excellent, only to discover too late that excellence in rank did not equal kindness in a man. She did not know how fragile the chain of his tyranny truly was. She did not know that within the hour her husband's heart would seize in his chest, that he would collapse beside the very chair where he now sat, criticizing the way she held her fork. She knew only the familiar weight of his displeasure, the way it pressed against her ribs like a physical thing, making each breath an act of careful negotiation. "You embarrassed me tonight," Edmund said, his voice carrying the particular tone that made her stomach clench. "Before Graydon and the others, speaking of matters you could not possibly understand." Rosalind's fingers tightened imperceptibly against each other. She had mentioned, briefly, so briefly, an observation about the agricultural reforms being debated in Parliament. It had been foolish. After 10 years, she should have known better. If stories of resilience and unexpected courage move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what unfolds when a woman discovers that freedom, not love, is the truest happy ending. Edmund's face had gone suddenly pale. His hand moved to his chest, fingers splaying wide as though trying to grasp something invisible. The wine glass tilted, spilling red across the white tablecloth like a wound opening. "Edmund?" Rosalind half rose from her chair, years of trained obedience warring with a sensation she could not immediately name. The Viscount made a sound, half gasp, half groan, and then he was falling, his chair scraping violently backward as his body crumpled to the floor. Rosalind stood frozen for 3 full seconds. In those seconds, her mind catalogued everything with a clarity that would later shame her. The way Edmund's face had taken on a grayish cast, the unnatural angle of his limbs against the Persian carpet, the profound, shocking silence that followed the cessation of his labored breathing, and beneath it all, threading through her shock like a ribbon of something she dared not examine too closely, relief. The servants came running. The doctor was summoned. Within the hour, Dr. Hartwell pronounced what Rosalind had already known. Edmund Talbot, Viscount Thornbury, had departed this world at the age of 45, victim to an apoplexy. "I am deeply sorry for your loss, Lady Thornbury," the doctor said, using the title that was now hers by widowhood. His eyes held sympathy that she could not, in that moment, feel she deserved. "Thank you," Rosalind heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. "The children. I must tell the children." Dr. Hartwell departed. The servants whispered in corners, already donning the blacks of mourning, and Rosalind stood in the doorway of the dining room, looking at the place where her husband had fallen, and felt nothing but the weight of her own guilt for the one thought that would not stop repeating in her mind. "I am free. God help me. I am free." The weeks that followed Edmund's death passed in a haze of social obligation. Rosalind wore her blacks, received condolences, played the role of grieving widow with a performance honed by 10 years of playing whatever role her husband demanded. The ton expected tears, and so she provided them. They expected trembling fragility, and she obliged. Only her children saw the moments when the mask slipped. Thomas, at 14, possessed his father's sharp gray eyes, but not yet his cruelty. He found his mother one evening in the library, a room Edmund had forbidden her to frequent, claiming books only confused her simple mind. "Mamma," Thomas said carefully, as though approaching something wild that might bolt. "You seem different." Rosalind looked up from the volume of poetry she had been reading, truly reading, for the first time in a decade, without fear of Edmund's mockery. Different. Yes, she supposed she was. "Your father's death has changed many things," she said, choosing her words with the precision of someone still learning to speak truth. Thomas moved closer, his young face troubled. "I know I should be distressed. Father was an important man, and now he is gone. But Mama, I must confess something." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I feel lighter without him here. Does that make me wicked?" The words struck Rosalind like a physical blow. She had worked so hard to shield her children from the worst of Edmund's treatment, to absorb his cruelty so that it might not fall upon them. But children, she realized with a sharp pang, saw everything. "No, darling." She reached for her son's hand, squeezed it with a firmness she had not possessed a month ago. "It makes you honest. And honesty, I am discovering, is not wickedness at all." 3 months into her widowhood, Rosalind's sister Eleanor arrived from Bath, where she had been residing since her own unfortunate marriage to a merchant had resulted in social censure. Edmund had forbidden Rosalind from maintaining contact with Eleanor, claiming her sister's reduced circumstances reflected poorly on the Talbot name. The sisters met in the morning room, and Eleanor's first words were not of sympathy, but of observation. "Rose," she said, using the childhood name Edmund had deemed insufficiently dignified, "you are different." "So Thomas told me," Rosalind replied. She poured tea with steady hands, noting with some surprise that they no longer trembled as they had during Edmund's lifetime. "Different? How?" Eleanor studied her with 2 knowing eyes. "You are present. These past 10 years, when I saw you at family gatherings, before Edmund cut off even those, it was as though you were disappearing, fading, like watercolor left in the sun." She paused, her voice gentling. "Now you are here again, all of you." Rosalind set down the teapot. The truth sat on her tongue, bitter and freeing all at once. "He made me small," she said quietly. "Every day, with every word and gesture, Edmund made me smaller, until I almost forgot there had been anything more to me than the inadequate creature he insisted I was. And now? Now I am remembering. And Eleanor." Rosalind's voice caught. "It is terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. I manage the estate accounts, and they balance. I make decisions about the children's education, and they are sound ones. I have thoughts about politics and literature and 100 other things Edmund claimed were beyond my simple understanding." She laughed, the sound almost breaking. "I am not stupid. I never was." Eleanor reached across the tea service and grasped Rosalind's hand. "No, dearest, you never were. But he made you believe it, did he not? That is the cruelest magic, making someone doubt the evidence of their own mind." "He isolated me from everyone who might have reminded me otherwise," Rosalind said. "From you especially. He said you were a bad influence, that your reduced circumstances proved your inferior judgment." She met her sister's eyes. "I am sorry I allowed it. I am sorry I chose him over you." "You survived," Eleanor said firmly. "That is all that matters. You survived, and now you are here, and we have time to reclaim what was lost." It was in this moment of hard-won honesty between sisters that the butler entered, carrying a silver salver with a calling card upon it. "Lord Graydon, the Marquess of Ashfield, requests an audience with your ladyship," the butler intoned. "He wishes to convey his condolences." Rosalind took the card, studying the elegant script. Tobias Graydon had been a friend of Edmund's, a contemporary in age and circumstance. A widower himself, having lost his wife some 5 years previous. Respectable, wealthy, connected to half the important families in England. "Show him in," Rosalind heard herself say. even as some small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning she could not yet name. Lord Graydon cut an impressive figure as he entered the morning room. At 42, he possessed the kind of distinguished attractiveness that age brought to men while cruelly denying to women, or so society insisted. His dark hair showed gray at the temples, his posture spoke of military service in his youth, and his eyes held what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Lady Thornbury," he said, bowing with perfect propriety, "please accept my deepest condolences. Edmund's loss is felt keenly by all who knew him." Rosalind performed the expected courtesies, introduced her sister, ordered fresh tea. Eleanor excused herself with transparent purpose, leaving Rosalind alone with Lord Graydon under the watchful eye of the maid stationed by the door. "Edmund spoke often of you," Lord Graydon said as he accepted his teacup. "He was devoted to his family." Something in Rosalind's chest tightened. Devoted. Yes, Edmund had been devoted. Devoted to control, to criticism, to the systematic dismantling of her sense of self. But this was not a truth one spoke aloud, particularly not to one's late husband's friends. "You are kind to say so, my lord," she replied, the automatic deflection coming easily after years of practice. "I hope you will not think me forward, Lady Thornbury, but I wish you to know that should you require any assistance in managing your affairs during this difficult time, I stand ready to offer whatever aid I might provide." Lord Graydon's smile was warm, his tone solicitous. These matters of estate management and legal concerns can be overwhelming for a lady alone. There it was, subtle, wrapped in concern, but there nonetheless, the assumption of her incompetence. Rosalind felt Eleanor's earlier words echo in her mind. "You manage the estate accounts, and they balance." "I appreciate your concern, Lord Graydon," she said carefully. "However, I have found that the accounts are not so terribly complex as I had been led to believe. With the assistance of my late husband's excellent man of business, I am managing quite well." Something flickered across Lord Graydon's face, surprise perhaps, or something less pleasant. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same solicitous smile. "Admirable," he said, "truly admirable. Edmund was fortunate in his choice of wife, beauty and capability combined." The compliment sat uneasily with Rosalind. Edmund had never called her beautiful, pretty perhaps in their earliest days before the criticism had begun in earnest. But beauty? That word had been reserved for the women he would point out at balls and assemblies, the comparison always hanging unspoken but clear between them. Lord Graydon stayed for the appropriate duration, departed with promises to call again, and left Rosalind feeling unsettled in a way she could not immediately articulate. Eleanor returned the moment the door closed behind him. "Well?" "He was perfectly polite," Rosalind said. But nothing. He offered assistance, as any gentleman might. I am being foolish." Eleanor tilted her head, studying her sister with that too-knowing gaze. "You spent 10 years learning to read the subtleties of a man's displeasure, Rose. I doubt you have forgotten how to recognize the warning signs." Rosalind opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Because Eleanor was right. She had seen all of this before. She had married it once. "I am being oversensitive," Rosalind said, but even to her own ears, the words lacked conviction. Spring arrived with an unexpected warmth, and with it came a transformation in the Viscountess that did not go unnoticed by the ton. Lady Thornbury, they whispered, had emerged from her mourning period changed. She attended social functions with her sister as companion, spoke with surprising intelligence on matters of estate management, and demonstrated a confidence that seemed at odds with her previous reputation as Edmund's quiet, retiring wife. Lord Graydon's attentions had become more pronounced. He called regularly, brought gifts for the children, spoke eloquently of his own late wife and the loneliness of widowhood. To the casual observer, he was the perfect suitor, patient, respectful, appropriately cautious given Rosalind's recent loss. But Rosalind was no longer a casual observer of her own life. It was in the garden at Thornbury Hall, 6 months after Edmund's death, that Lord Graydon made his intentions unmistakable. They walked the gravelled paths, the maid trailing at a discreet distance, and spoke of inconsequential things until Lord Graydon paused beside a rosebush, heavy with late summer blooms. "Lady Thornbury, Rosalind, if I might be so bold, I believe you must know the particular regard in which I hold you." Rosalind's fingers tightened on her parasol. "Lord Graydon, Please allow me to speak." His voice held that same gentle authority she had learned to recognize. "You are a woman of exceptional qualities, thrust into difficult circumstances. Your children require a father's guidance. Your estate, while you manage it admirably, would benefit from a man's oversight." He took a step closer. "I am offering you my protection, my name, my devotion. I am asking you to do me the great honor of becoming my wife." The words should have brought relief, gratitude, perhaps even joy. A marquis was proposing marriage to a viscountess. It was an elevation in status, a promise of security, everything society deemed important for a woman in her position. Instead, Rosalind felt her carefully rebuilt sense of self constrict, as though Lord Graydon's proposal were a cage closing around her. "You honor me greatly, my lord," she began, choosing words with extreme care. "However, I am not yet—" "Time, naturally," Lord Graydon interrupted, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "I am patient, dear lady. I shall wait. But perhaps you might consider the practical aspects while your heart catches up to reason?" His hand moved as though to touch her arm, then retreated when she stepped back. "Forgive me. I do not mean to press. But Rosalind, a woman alone, particularly one with 3 children to raise and an estate to manage. A fortune is always best managed by a firm hand. Society rarely forgives a woman who refuses a suitable protector." There it was again, wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile, but unmistakable in its message. "You cannot manage alone. You need me." "I appreciate your patience, Lord Graydon," Rosalind said, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "I ask that you allow me time to consider your generous offer." "Of course." He bowed, smiled, departed with all the appearance of a gentleman satisfied that his suit would eventually succeed. Rosalind stood in the garden long after he had gone, staring at the roses without truly seeing them. Her mind replayed the conversation, cataloging each subtle pressure, each gentle insistence on her inadequacy. "Mama?" She turned to find Beatrice approaching, her 12-year-old face creased with worry. Her daughter had inherited Edmund's dark hair, but Rosalind's own gray-blue eyes, and in them now shone a perception that seemed far too mature for her years. "I saw Lord Graydon leave," Beatrice said. "He looked pleased with himself." "Did he?" Rosalind managed to smile. "Perhaps he enjoyed our conversation." "Did you enjoy it, Mama?" The question hung between them, simple and devastating in its directness. Rosalind thought of the easy lies she might tell, the reassurances she could offer. But she had promised herself honesty, had she not? At least with those who mattered most. "No, darling," she said quietly. "I did not." Beatrice moved closer, slipping her small hand into Rosalind's larger one. "Father used to make you unhappy. Before he died, you never smiled. Not really." The observation pierced Rosalind's heart. "You noticed?" "We all did, Mama. Thomas and Henry and I. We used to wish—" Beatrice trailed off, then gathered her courage. "We used to wish you could be happy, and now you are. Or you were, before Lord Graydon started calling." Rosalind knelt, bringing herself level with her daughter's earnest gaze. "Lord Graydon is a perfectly respectable gentleman." "Father was a perfectly respectable gentleman too," Beatrice said with a child's devastating logic. "Everyone said so. But he made you sad every single day." The truth of it sat heavy between them. Rosalind pulled her daughter into an embrace, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her young body against her own. "You are very wise for 12 years old," Rosalind whispered. "Will you marry him, Mama, Lord Graydon?" "I do not know," Rosalind said honestly, "but I promise you this, my darling girl. Whatever I decide, it will be my choice, mine alone." The weeks that followed brought an uncomfortable clarity. Lord Graydon's courtship intensified, and with it came a creeping sense of déjà vu that Rosalind could no longer ignore. He began offering opinions on her attire. "That shade of green is lovely, my dear, but perhaps the blue would be more appropriate for a woman of your dignity?" He suggested modifications to her schedule. "These morning rides alone with only a groom for company, are they truly necessary? I worry for your safety, dearest Rosalind." He questioned her decisions regarding the children. "Thomas requires firmer guidance than a mother can provide. Boys his age need a man's discipline." Each comment, taken individually, seemed reasonable. Wrapped in concern, delivered with affection, easily dismissed as the protective instincts of a devoted suitor. But accumulated, they formed a pattern that Rosalind recognized with sickening familiarity. It was Eleanor who finally said what Rosalind had been thinking, but lacked the courage to voice. "He is doing to you what Edmund did," Eleanor said bluntly one afternoon, as they took tea in the library. "Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. He is teaching you to doubt yourself again." Rosalind set down her teacup with a trembling hand. "I thought perhaps I was being oversensitive. After Edmund, I thought—" "That your judgment was impaired?" Eleanor's voice was sharp. "That is precisely what Lord Graydon is counting on. That your years with Edmund have taught you to distrust your own instincts, to accept a man's opinion over your own certainty." "But everyone says he is an excellent match," Rosalind protested weakly. "A marquis, Eleanor. Wealthy, connected, respected. What reason would he have to—" "The same reason Edmund did," Eleanor interrupted. "Because some men require control the way others require air. It is not about you specifically, Rose. It is about his need to be superior, to be necessary, to be the authority against which you are always found wanting." She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "But do you understand what makes Lord Graydon more dangerous than Edmund ever was? Edmund's cruelty was obvious enough that you eventually recognized it for what it was. Graydon's control is wrapped in respectability, in good manners, in society's approval. Everyone will tell you how fortunate you are, how grateful you should be. That makes it nearly impossible to fight, Rose. You will question your own sanity before anyone questions his behavior." Eleanor paused, letting the words sink in. "You have learned to manage without a husband. You balance accounts he claimed were too complex for your understanding. You make decisions he insists require masculine oversight. Do you not see? Your independence is a threat to his sense of himself." The words settled over Rosalind like a weight and a revelation all at once. Because Eleanor was right. These past months, despite her grief and guilt and confusion, despite the Tun's whispers and her own moments of doubt, Rosalind had proved something to herself. She was capable. She was intelligent. She was enough, all on her own. And Lord Graydon, with his gentle insistence and solicitous concern, was trying to teach her otherwise. "What do I do?" Rosalind asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's answer was simple and terrifying in equal measure. "You refuse him." And the opportunity came sooner than Rosalind had anticipated. Lord Graydon, growing impatient with her continued hesitation, arranged for a formal dinner at his London townhouse. He invited mutual friends, respected members of the Tun, and, most significantly, Edmund's mother, the Dowager Lady Thornbury, who had made her disapproval of Rosalind's widowhood quite clear. The Dowager believed that Rosalind's duty was to remarry immediately, to provide her grandchildren with a proper father figure, to erase the stain of Edmund's death by accepting the first suitable offer that came her way. That Lord Graydon was a marquis only strengthened her conviction that Rosalind was being unconscionably difficult in not immediately accepting his suit. Rosalind arrived at the dinner knowing, with a certainty that felt like steel in her spine, what the evening would bring. This was Lord Graydon's carefully orchestrated stage, designed to corner her into acceptance through social pressure and public expectation. The dining room was elegantly appointed, the guests impeccably chosen, the conversation steered with deliberate intent toward topics of marriage, duty, and the proper role of women in society. Lord Graydon played the gracious host, solicitous toward Rosalind, charming to the other guests, painting a picture of himself as the patient suitor awaiting only his beloved's word to make their union complete. It was between the third and fourth courses that he made his move. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lord Graydon said, rising from his seat with a practiced grace that suggested he had rehearsed this moment, "I beg your indulgence for a brief departure from our delightful conversation. I have a matter of some importance to address." The guests fell silent, expectation thick in the air. Rosalind felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of their collective anticipation pressing against her ribs. Lord Graydon moved to stand beside her chair, reached into his coat, and withdrew a small velvet box. He dropped to one knee with elegant precision, and Rosalind knew, everyone in the room knew, that this was meant to be her moment of capitulation. "Lady Rosalind Talbot," he said, his voice carrying that same gentle authority she had learned to recognize as control disguised as care. "You have honored me with your company these past months. You have shown me that the heart can find joy even after loss, that love can bloom even in the shadow of grief." He opened the box, revealing a ring of impressive size and cost. "I ask you now, before these witnesses, before God and society, to grant me the greatest honor of my life. Will you consent to be my wife?" The room held its breath. The Dowager Lady Thornbury nodded approvingly. The other guests smiled with benevolent expectation. This was the moment where the widow accepted gratefully, where propriety triumphed, where a woman alone embraced the protection and authority of a suitable husband. Rosalind looked at Lord Graydon's face, at the confidence in his eyes, at the ring that was meant to symbolize devotion, but felt instead like a shackle. She thought of Edmund, of 10 years spent shrinking herself, of learning to doubt her every thought and desire and instinct. She thought of these past months, of rediscovering the person she had been before marriage had taught her to disappear. And she thought of Beatrice's words in the garden. "Will you marry him, Mamma?" And her own promise. "Whatever I decide, it will be my choice, mine alone." Rosalind rose from her seat. Lord Graydon's smile widened, assuming her movement was preparation for acceptance. The guests leaned forward in anticipation. "Lord Graydon," Rosalind said, her voice steady and clear and absolutely certain, "I am honored by your proposal. Truly, I am. You are an excellent man, respected by all who know you, possessed of every quality society deems desirable in a husband." She paused, watching understanding begin to dawn in his eyes as her tone registered. This was not the preamble to acceptance. This was something else entirely. "However," she continued, each word chosen with deliberate care, "I find that I must decline your generous offer." The room erupted in shocked whispers. The Dowager Lady Thornbury gasped audibly, and Lord Graydon's face transformed from confident suitor to something harder, something that revealed the man beneath the careful mask. "You refuse?" His voice held disbelief and something darker. "Lady Thornbury, I urge you to reconsider. A woman in your position, with children to raise and an estate to manage, cannot afford to dismiss such an opportunity out of hand." "I am not dismissing it out of hand, my lord," Rosalind replied. "I have considered your offer carefully, and I have concluded that I am not in need of the protection you offer, nor the guidance you believe I require." Lord Graydon rose, the box still open in his hand, his posture rigid with poorly concealed anger. "You cannot possibly manage alone. You are Forgive my bluntness, inadequately prepared for the challenges you will face without a husband's oversight." There it was, the mask fallen completely away, revealing the same dismissal of her capability that Edmund had wielded like a weapon. The same insistence that she was inherently insufficient, fundamentally flawed, desperately in need of masculine correction. "I have been managing alone for 6 months, Lord Graydon," Rosalind said quietly, "and I have discovered that I am far more adequate than I was led to believe. My estate is profitable, my children are thriving, and I—" Her voice strengthened. "I am happier than I have been in 10 years. "This is madness," the Dowager Lady Thornbury interjected, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Rosalind, think of your children. Think of society. You cannot seriously mean to refuse a marquis, to choose spinsterhood over an advantageous marriage. Edmund would be ashamed." The mention of Edmund, deployed like a weapon meant to wound, had the opposite effect. Because Rosalind remembered now, with perfect clarity, exactly what Edmund's opinion had been worth. She remembered 10 years of criticism, of control, of systematic diminishment. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that Edmund's shame was the highest compliment she could receive. "Edmund," Rosalind said, meeting the Dowager's outraged gaze with calm directness, "spent our entire marriage convincing me that I was incapable of independent thought, that my opinions were foolish, my judgments flawed, my very existence an exercise in inadequacy requiring his constant correction." She turned back to Lord Graydon, whose face had gone pale. "I recognize now the patterns of that teaching, and I recognize them in your courtship, my lord. The gentle suggestions that my choices are questionable, the solicitous concern that masks dismissal of my competence, the positioning of yourself as necessary for my survival." "You are being hysterical," Lord Graydon said, his voice tight. "I have shown you nothing but respect and patience." "You have shown me exactly what Edmund showed me," Rosalind corrected. "Control dressed as care, dismissal wrapped in concern. And I cannot submit myself to that again, no matter how prestigious the title or how advantageous society deems the match." She turned to address the room at large, these witnesses Lord Graydon had assembled to ensure her compliance. "I understand that my choice will seem incomprehensible to you, that a woman who refuses a marquis must be either mad or foolish. But I assure you, I am neither. I am simply a woman who has learned, at great cost, that some cages are more dangerous than solitude, and some companionship more isolating than being alone." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, with deliberate grace, Rosalind executed a perfect curtsy to the company, met Lord Graydon's furious gaze one final time, and departed the dining room with her head high and her heart, for perhaps the first time in a decade, entirely her own. The scandal was immediate. Lady Thornbury had refused a marquis before witnesses, chosen spinsterhood over an advantageous match. The ton deemed her unnatural. The invitations stopped arriving. The Dowager Lady Thornbury cut her completely. And Rosalind, standing in the wreckage of her social reputation, discovered something remarkable. She did not care, or rather she cared less than she valued her freedom. She cared less than she valued the ability to wake each morning without the weight of a man's disapproval pressing against her chest. She cared less than she valued the right to make her own choices, even when those choices brought social censure. Eleanor, predictably, was triumphant. "You did it," she said when they met in the library at Thornbury Hall, now Rosalind's permanent residence. "You chose yourself." "I am now the most notorious woman in London," Rosalind pointed out, though her voice held more amusement than distress. "You are free," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference." The children, too, showed surprising resilience in the face of social scandal. Thomas, at 14, declared himself proud of his mother's courage. Beatrice clung to her with fierce affection, as though afraid someone might try to take her away. And young Henry, at 9, simply asked if this meant Lord Graydon would stop visiting. then expressed relief when told it did. It was Beatrice, however, who articulated what Rosalind herself was only beginning to understand. "Mamma," she said one evening, as they sat together in the drawing room, "do you think you will ever marry again?" Rosalind considered the question carefully. "I do not know, darling. Perhaps. If I found someone who valued me as I am, who sought partnership rather than authority." She paused. "But perhaps not. I am discovering that marriage is not necessary for happiness, that I can be complete all on my own. Miss Hartwell says that a woman who refuses marriage is unnatural," Beatrice said, referring to her governess. "Miss Hartwell," Rosalind replied firmly, "is welcome to her opinion. But she has not lived my life. She does not know what I have survived, or what I have learned, or what I now refuse to tolerate." She pulled Beatrice close. "When you are grown, my darling girl, you will have choices I did not have. You will know your own worth, and you will never, ever allow anyone to make you small." Time, as it inevitably does, continued its forward march. The scandal of Rosalind's refusal faded into the background noise of the Tons' collective memory, replaced by newer scandals and fresher gossip. Lord Graydon married within the year, a young woman of 20, biddable and grateful for the honor of his title. Rosalind heard later that the new Marchioness was rarely seen in society without her husband's approval, that she dressed according to his preference, that she deferred to his judgment in all matters. And Rosalind, free of the need to perform gratitude for her own oppression, found herself building a life she had never imagined possible. She turned her attention to the estate with renewed vigor, implementing improvements that increased its profitability. She established a small fund for widows in difficult circumstances, understanding from bitter experience the vulnerability of women without masculine protection. She reconnected with old friends Edmund had discouraged, rebuilt relationships he had slowly severed, created a social circle based on genuine affection rather than strategic advancement. She wrote, too, essays on estate management, observations on the legal disadvantages facing women, practical advice for widows navigating the treacherous waters of financial independence. She published them anonymously, knowing that her name carried too much scandal to be useful, but found deep satisfaction in contributing knowledge that might help others in circumstances similar to her own. And she learned, slowly and with considerable difficulty, to trust her own judgment again, to recognize that her thoughts and opinions and decisions were valid, were valuable, were worth the space they occupied in the world. 2 years after Edmund's death, 18 months after refusing Lord Graydon, Rosalind sat in the library at Thornbury Hall, reviewing the estate accounts with satisfaction. The numbers were excellent, the tenants were prospering, her children were thriving, and she was happy. Genuinely, surprisingly, persistently happy. Thomas entered, now 16 and preparing for university. He had grown tall, his features settling into a more mature cast, and Rosalind could see in him the man he would become. Someone kinder than his father, more certain of his own worth, raised by a mother who had learned to value herself. "Mama," he said, settling into the chair opposite her desk, "I have been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," Rosalind teased gently. Thomas smiled, then sobered. "I remember, Father, how he was with you, and I have been thinking about the man I want to become." He met her eyes directly. "I want to be nothing like him." The words struck Rosalind with unexpected force. She set down her pen, giving her son her full attention. "You are already nothing like him, Thomas. You are kind. You are thoughtful. You listen when others speak, rather than waiting for your turn to correct them." "I have watched you these past 2 years," Thomas continued. "I have seen how you have changed, or perhaps how you have become more yourself. And I think Father tried to take that away from you, yourself. And you let him because that was what you had been taught to do. But then he died, and you got yourself back." He paused. I never want to be the man who takes someone else's self away. Not from a wife, or a sister, or a daughter, or anyone. Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. This, she thought, was what healing looked like. Not just reclaiming her own sense of worth, but raising children who understood that another person's dignity was inviolable, that control was not love, that true partnership required mutual respect. "You will be a good man, Thomas," she said softly, "the very best kind of man." It was the spring of 1828, more than 2 years since Edmund's death, nearly 2 years since refusing Lord Graydon, when Rosalind truly understood the full measure of her transformation. She stood in the garden at Thornbury Hall, the same garden where Lord Graydon had proposed, and felt no echo of that old anxiety. The roses bloomed as they always did, indifferent to human drama. The sun warmed her shoulders, and she was alone, by choice, by design, by deliberate cultivation of her own company. Eleanor had married again, a gentle schoolteacher who valued her intelligence and treated her as an equal. She was expecting her first child, glowing with a happiness that her first marriage had never provided. Watching Eleanor's joy, Rosalind felt no envy, no sense of missing out. She felt only gladness for her sister and contentment with her own chosen path. "Mama," Beatrice came running through the garden, now 14 and beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with mere physical appearance. She carried herself with confidence that Rosalind had never possessed at that age, secure in the knowledge that her thoughts and feelings and dreams mattered. "Mama, the most extraordinary thing has happened," Beatrice said breathlessly. "Miss Hartwell has given notice. She is leaving to be married." "That is wonderful news for her," Rosalind said. "Yes, but Mama, she wanted to speak with me before she left, to apologize." Beatrice's expression was bemused. "She said she had been wrong about you, that she had judged you harshly for refusing Lord Graydon, but that she now understood you had been right to choose independence. She said she saw the evidence of that courage in her pupils, my independence and Thomas's kindness." Beatrice paused, as though hardly believing the words. "She said you were the bravest woman she had ever known." Rosalind absorbed this unexpected vindication. Miss Hartwell, who had been so quick to condemn, who had insisted that a woman refusing marriage was unnatural, changed by time, by observation, by witnessing what independence could look like when it was genuine rather than forced. "People can surprise us," Rosalind said, "even when we think we know exactly who they are." "Will you hire a new governess?" Beatrice asked. "Do you want one?" Beatrice considered this. "I would prefer to attend the seminary in Bath, if you think it appropriate. Aunt Eleanor says the teaching there is excellent, and that they encourage independent thinking in young women." Another choice. Another opportunity for Rosalind to demonstrate the lessons she had learned. She could insist on a governess, maintaining control over her daughter's education. Or she could trust Beatrice to know her own mind, to pursue the education she desired. "If you wish to attend the seminary, then we shall make arrangements," Rosalind said. "I trust your judgment, Beatrice." Her daughter's face lit with joy, and Rosalind understood that this too was a kind of healing, teaching her children that they were worthy of trust, that their choices mattered, that they possessed inherent value regardless of what society or tradition or masculine authority insisted. That evening, after the children had retired and the servants had completed their duties, Rosalind sat alone in the library. It had become her favorite room, this space that Edmund had forbidden her. She had filled it with books on every subject that interested her: history, philosophy, agricultural science, political theory. The leather spines gleamed in the firelight, a physical representation of all the knowledge Edmund had claimed was beyond her understanding. She had been rereading one of her favorite volumes, a treatise on crop rotation and land management, when a thought struck her with unexpected clarity. She was happy. Not someday happy. Not happy with qualifications or reservations or apologies. Simply, purely, presently happy. This realization was so profound, so fundamentally transformative, that Rosalind set down her book and allowed herself to fully experience it. The absence of fear, the absence of walking on perpetual eggshells, trying to anticipate and deflect a man's displeasure. The absence of that constant grinding sense of inadequacy that had colored every moment of her marriage. She thought of Lord Graydon, married now to his biddable young wife, and wondered if he understood what he had tried to take from her. Wondered if men like him, men like Edmund, ever grasped the full weight of what they stole when they systematically dismantled a woman's sense of self. But more importantly, she thought of all the women who might be living what she had lived. The wives who went to bed each night feeling small. The brides who mistook control for care. The mothers who absorbed cruelty to shield their children. And she thought of the fund she had established, the essays she had written, the example she was setting for Beatrice and countless others who might be watching. This, she understood now, was her true triumph. Not refusing Lord Graydon, though that had been important, not surviving Edmund, though that had been necessary, but choosing, actively and deliberately, to build a life defined not by what she had escaped, but by what she had claimed for herself. Freedom, agency, self-possession, happiness. The door opened, and Thomas entered, clearly hoping to find her still awake. "Mama," he said, "might I ask you something?" "Of course, darling." Thomas settled into the chair opposite hers, and for a moment looked so young, so earnest, that Rosalind's heart ached with love for this boy she had somehow managed to raise well despite Edmund's influence. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Refusing Lord Graydon? Society still whispers about it. The dowager grandmother refuses to acknowledge us. And I know that you are sometimes lonely, even if you claim otherwise." Rosalind considered the question with the honesty she owed her children. "I am sometimes lonely," she acknowledged. "But Thomas, I was far more lonely during my marriage to your father than I have ever been in solitude. Loneliness chosen is different from loneliness imposed, and between the two, I will always choose my own company over companionship that requires me to diminish myself. But do you not wish for love? For partnership? I do not wish for what society calls love, which often seems indistinguishable from possession. As for partnership," Rosalind paused, searching for the right words. "If I met someone who truly valued me as an equal, who sought to build with me rather than over me, who understood that my independence was not a threat, but a gift. Perhaps, but I will never again trade my freedom for the illusion of security. The cost is too high." Thomas nodded slowly, processing this. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "I think Father underestimated you." "Most people did," Rosalind replied, "including myself, for far too long. But I am finished underestimating myself, Thomas. Finished allowing others to define my worth. And if that makes me eccentric or difficult or unnatural in the eyes of society..." She shrugged. "I find I care remarkably little for society's opinion when weighted against my own peace of mind." After Thomas left, Rosalind returned to her book, but found her thoughts wandering. She thought of all the women she had been, and now, simply, she was Rosalind, whole and unburdened. The clock chimed midnight. She marked her page, extinguished the lamps, and made her way to her bedchamber. As she prepared for sleep, she caught her reflection in the mirror, a woman of 37, gray threads showing in her dark blonde hair, lines around her eyes from laughter and worry both. She looked, Rosalind thought with satisfaction, like herself. The years continued their forward march, bringing with them the small triumphs and challenges that make up any life lived honestly. Thomas went to university, distinguishing himself in his studies and returning during holidays with ideas about political reform that made Rosalind's heart swell with pride. Beatrice thrived at the seminary, making friendships based on shared intellectual interests rather than social advancement. And Henry, the youngest, displayed a talent for music that Edmund would have dismissed as frivolous, but that Rosalind encouraged with wholehearted enthusiasm. The Dowager Lady Thornbury passed away, taking with her the last vestige of Edmund's direct influence on Rosalind's life. Lord Graydon's wife bore him 3 children in quick succession, then retreated into quiet invalidism, a fate Rosalind recognized with a combination of sympathy and profound gratitude that it was not her own. And Rosalind herself became, in the way of such things, a fixture of the community, if not of high society. She was known for her competent estate management, her generous support of widows in difficulty, her well-educated children, and her stubborn refusal to remarry despite numerous offers over the years. It was at a country assembly 5 years after Edmund's death that Rosalind overheard a conversation that brought home the full measure of how far she had come. 2 young women, barely out, whispered behind their fans as she passed. "That is Lady Thornbury," one said. "The one who refused the Marquis of Ashfield." "I heard she has refused 3 other proposals as well," her companion replied. "Do you suppose she's waiting for a duke?" "I think," the first said thoughtfully, "that she is not waiting for anyone. My mamma says Lady Thornbury is eccentric, but I think she is rather brave. To choose herself over a title? To build a life alone, rather than accept companionship that diminishes her? I find it rather wonderful." Rosalind, hidden behind a column, felt tears prick her eyes. Not everyone would understand. Many would continue to judge her choices as unnatural, her independence as unwomanly, her happiness as impossible. But for every person who condemned, there might be one who saw in her example a different possibility, a different kind of life. And that, Rosalind thought, was worth every whisper, every judgment, every social censure she had endured. That evening she returned to Thornbury Hall and sat in her library surrounded by her books and her thoughts and her hard-won peace. The fire crackled in the hearth. The house settled around her with familiar sounds, and Rosalind, alone by choice and complete in herself, felt a contentment so profound it might have been mistaken for joy. Perhaps it was joy. Perhaps this was what happiness looked like when it belonged entirely to oneself, untethered from anyone else's approval or disapproval, dependent only on the knowledge that one had been true to one's own deepest understanding of what life should be. She had survived Edmund. She had refused Graydon. She had rebuilt herself from the shattered pieces of a decade spent disappearing, had learned to trust her own judgment, had raised children who understood that another person's worth was inviolable. And she had learned, most importantly, that freedom was not a consolation prize for those who failed to secure marriage. Freedom was the prize itself. Everything else, love, partnership, companionship, could only be valuable if it enhanced rather than diminished that fundamental liberty. Rosalind picked up her pen and the journal she had been keeping, began to write the words that would become another anonymous essay about widowhood and independence and the courage required to choose oneself. "Society tells women that we are incomplete without masculine partnership," she wrote. "That our worth is measured by our ability to secure and maintain a husband's regard. But I have learned a different truth. We are complete as we are. Partnership should be an addition to an already whole life, not the creation of that wholeness. And when partnership requires the surrender of self, when companionship demands diminishment, when love insists on submission, then solitude becomes not a failure, but a triumph." She wrote until the candles burned low, until her hand cramped with effort, until the words had captured something of the truth she had learned at such cost. Then she set down her pen, extinguished the lights, and made her way to bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. Her children would continue growing into themselves. The estate would require her attention. Life would unfold in its unpredictable fashion. But tonight, Rosalind slept the dreamless sleep of someone who had fought a silent war against her own erasure and emerged victorious, who had chosen freedom over security, solitude over submission, herself over anyone else's vision of who she should be. And in the morning, she would wake to a life entirely her own, flawed and difficult and occasionally lonely, but utterly, completely, magnificently free. And so Lady Thornbury found her peace, a quiet victory in a world that demanded her submission. Dear listener, perhaps you have known your own version of Edmund. Perhaps you have felt the slow erosion of self that comes from loving someone who sees you not as an equal, but as a project requiring constant correction. Perhaps you have been taught, as Rosalind was taught, to doubt your own mind, to dismiss your own judgment, to believe that your worth is measured only by another's approval. Know this: you are not broken for recognizing the pattern. You are not weak for walking away from what society insists you should want. You are not selfish for choosing the difficult freedom of solitude over the comfortable cage of companionship that requires you to shrink. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse what everyone else insists we should desire. Sometimes happiness looks nothing like what we were told it should look like. Sometimes the truest love is the one we finally learn to give ourselves. Complete acceptance, steadfast loyalty, the recognition that we are enough, exactly as we are. If you are building your life piece by careful piece after someone tried to dismantle you, know that you are not alone. If you are learning to trust your own judgment after years of being taught it was worthless, know that healing is not linear, but it is possible. If you are choosing yourself when everyone insists you should choose companionship, know that your courage is real and your choice is valid. Rest well tonight, knowing that you deserve a life that makes you feel expansive rather than small, that honors your full self rather than demanding its diminishment. You are worthy of peace. You are worthy of freedom. You are worthy of joy that belongs entirely to you. With deepest respect for your journey and your courage. Thank you for journeying with us through Rosalind's story of survival and self-reclamation. If her courage to choose freedom over security moved you, please subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue telling stories of women who find their strength not in spite of their struggles, but because of them.
Damn, she's drawing some. I think you guys are gonna like it. I think you guys are gonna like what she's drawing because